Hi, good morning, everyone. It's yet another week, and I'm here to take you through globalization and development. As we all know, the coronavirus is increasing, cases are increasing. As of this morning, we had 93 cases, one survival, and I think three deaths. These are trying times for all of us, and I want us all to keep safe. Let us stick to the rules and regulations. Let us abide by what the experts are saying. You need to get this, your hand sanitizer. Make sure you always apply it anytime you touch a surface which you're not sure of. So use a hand sanitizer. It is very important in these times. I also have my nose masks here. So if you're going out, or even if you have somebody close to you, less than 1 meter distance, you need to put it on so that you don't transfer, or the person doesn't transfer the virus to you. Again, you need to get your soap. Always wash your hands. That is important. While you wash, you apply the sanitizer, and then you use your nose mask, and everything will be fine. Just stay home. If you don't have anything doing in town, please stay home. That is very important so that we will be able to contain this virus. All right. So with that, let us look at globalization and development. Today we are going to discuss issues of identity politics and resistance movements in a global stage. Okay. And we are going to do this by finding out what identity is. Then we go to what an identity group is. We look at the difference between identity groups and that of interest groups, because they are two different things. From there, we'll look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of what identity groups. And finally, we will assess the media, okay, the media's role, okay, in global identity politics and resistance movements. All right. Now, today we have two questions which you are supposed to work on and submit as part of your class work. Okay. So the questions are: explain four roles of the media in the formation and coordination of identity politics and resistance movements in the 21st century. Explain four roles of the media in the formation and coordination of identity politics and resistance movements in the 21st century. Again, the second question is: how does identity politics weaken the position of cosmopolitans? Okay, how does identity politics weaken the position of cosmopolitans? So kindly look at these things and work on them and submit them. All right. Okay, so let's start with identity. Now, what images do you form when you hear the following: Fulani herdsmen? What images come to your mind? Or what do you identify with Fulani herdsmen? Okay. Again, when you hear an Asante, what images do you form? If somebody tells you, I am an Asante, or just hearing the word an Asante, what comes to mind? Same as if you hear the word Ewe. Who is an Ewe? Or what identity or what image do you form for people who are what? Ewes. What about these two? Lesbians, gays, bisexual, transgender, LGBT. Do you form any images when you hear these words? Again, when you find yourself in a scenario in, say, Serie A, and there's an African player in Serie A, do you form another image or an identity? Or what comes to mind anytime we talk about African players and Serie A in the Italian league. Finally, when you hear of Ayawaso West Wuogon and Etiwa by-elections, what comes to mind? Ayawaso West Wuogon and Etiwa by-elections, what comes to mind? Now, anything that you think of, so far as these words are concerned, forms an identity about them. Those identities that you formed could be objective, they could also be subjective. The identities that you hear or the images that you have about these words and these places and these people all form up or all come together to make those things what they really are. So let us try to define identity. Now, when you look at the slide, we're saying that identity is a way of constructing meaning in people's lives. So identity is a means of building or creating a meaning, okay, about what? People's lives. At the time when the most important reason of modern states seems to be what? Vanishing. Now, states or modern states are supposed to bring an identity to a group of people. The modern state is supposed to create that identity for its people. But as a result of globalization, we all know that the role of states in our current dispensation are declining. So, identity, therefore, is how people now construct meaning of other people's lives. Okay, especially when the state no longer, or the role of the state in creating these identities is diminishing. Okay. Now, the second issue is that identity is a process whereby people draw on a cultural attribute, right, to build meaning in their lives. Now, identity is a process. It is not a state. So your identity keeps changing. Who you are today, you may not be the same person tomorrow. What existed today might not be existing tomorrow. So we are always in the process of what? Creating new identities for ourselves. Okay, so we are saying that it is a process whereby people draw on what? A cultural attribute. Now, cultural attributes are the characteristics that defines a culture. It could be the food, it could be the language, it could be the artifacts that they use. Okay, so if I want to be identified or my identity is per se an Akan, then some of my cultural attributes could be the kente, could be the golden stool, could be statements like Ukuma Pima Pimbeba, could be the fact that I believe in the ruler leadership of Otunfo. So these are the things that make what meaning to me, that identify me as an Asante, and those are the things that will make me believe in my culture and make me also to have something to do with what? The Asante Kingdom. Identities are constructs, and that all cultural phenomena are the product of what? Such construction. So everything about culture, culture is a creation. It's a construct, okay? People sat down and developed culture. Culture is dynamic. So once it changes, it means that there's the active ingredient or agent of human what? Factors, okay? So once we are able to change certain aspects of our culture, what it means is we are constructing the culture. We are not born with culture. We created what? Culture. So identities are what? Constructs. And that's all cultural phenomena are the product of what? Such construction. So whatever we are things that we decided to be, or are things that we decided to what? Create, okay, as part of our culture. So what we wear, what we eat, where we sleep are part of our identities. And of course, they are things that we thought about, and then brought them to be part of what? Our lives. An example, an Ewe cannot um, awake one morning and suddenly decide to be what? An Akan. Now, identities don't just happen. It takes time to create an identity for yourself, okay? The one day event doesn't make that an identity. So it takes longer time for identities to be what? Formed. Okay. So as I said, I never cannot wake up one day and say, I'm Akan. Why? Because becoming an Akan is a much more complex affair than just saying it, or than just saying, believing, or just dressing like an Akan. You can't be identified with an Akan just overnight. There are a lot of things that will go in to be able to identify you as what? An Akan. Now, what are some of the types of identity? Let us look at the three types of identity. Okay, we have legitimizing, resistance-based, and project-based identities. Let us take the first one, legitimizing identity. We are saying that this identity is constructed by what? Institutions, tribes, nations, and states. These are identities that are legitimate, either by birth, either by geographical location, either by sex, or what have you. So we are saying that it is constructed. What we call Ghanaians or an African is a construction, okay? And these constructions are done by the institutions we belong to, or by the countries or states that we would belong to. It takes the form of an institutional, tribal, or national identity. So you are identified by the fact that you were born or you belong to such an institution, a tribe, or what? A nation. Example, one assumes a legitimate identity by being born into what? A particular territory. Okay, so that is how legitimizing identity occurs. We identify as PR or journalism students of GIJ through our what? Matriculation at GIJ. So we are identified with what? GIJ, because we were ushered into GIJ through matriculation. So we are students of GIJ, and our identity as PR or journalism students of GIJ is as a result of what? That induction ceremony called what? Matriculation. At the time, as another example is at the time of the French Revolution, less than 13% of the territories now forming France spoke the language of the Ile de France. Now, Ile de France stands for city of France, okay, or a town of France. Now, when you pick France, okay, at the time, only 13% of the French actually behaved or spoke the language that was spoken in this town of France, okay. But at the end of the Third Republic, the French state had effectively forged a national identity. So just like we find it here in Ghana, where tribes and ethnicities have their own lifestyle, their own traditions, and what have you, the French was able to legitimize the culture of the Ile de France, okay, across all other cultures of France. So this assimilation process meant that every other region, every other tribe in France actually had to pick up this language spoken by the Ile de France, so that at the end of the day, they have what? A national language. They have a national culture. They are identified, okay, by certain things which are common to all the other states. So the French state effectively did what? Forged a national identity where all of them would behave the same, speak all the same language, and in terms of the cultural attributes, have the same cultural characteristics. The second is resistance-based identity. Now, in this case, groups who feel they are pushed to the fringes of society, either in cultural, political, or social terms, react by constructing what? An identity that allows them to resist assimilation by the system that subordinates them. So what we are saying here is that these are groups that resist certain identities. Okay. Now, in the case of the French, you realize that all the other tribes or all the other regions had to pick up from that of the Ile-de-France. Okay, the kind of things they were doing there. But you see that in other instances, people actually resist joining or picking up what other identities onto themselves. So anytime there's this resistance, then this kind of um, process is regarded as what resistance-based identity. Okay. Now we are saying that social groups take this path precisely because they cannot resist as citizens, or because they are in a minority and cannot exercise their what political rights. Now, if they are identified as a group of people within a nation, what it means is that they can't resist. If you pick on an identity that at the end of the day, that identity places you into a certain situation. Once you agree to it, it becomes difficult for you to do what? Resist. Just as we see now in the Homeland Security people, I mean the Togo people who want to, I mean the Volta region people who want to actually exit from Ghana. It's not working because you are now citizens, okay, of Ghana, and it becomes difficult to resist as what? A citizen. So you may have legitimate concerns, but then it is not possible because already you have been identified as what? A Ghanaian, and it's makes it difficult for you to resist. Or because they are what? In minority and cannot exercise their what? Political rights. So at times too, this identity is for a group of people who cannot who cannot exercise their political rights because they feel they are part of the minority, they are a marginalized group, and because of that, people are not listening to them. So they tend to resist or put on an identity which enables them to resist some of the plans and actions of what? The state. Example, you see that in minority groups demonstrations or resistance groups, such as what happened in the Kume you know, uh, demonstrations. Again, through the KNUST UEW students riots. Okay, now these are minorities, or they feel that there are certain people who have power and are not allowing them to what? Speak up. So they try to do what? Resist. So at that time they are what? Picking up the resistance based what? Identity. And also that of Ghana School of the Law students demonstrations. So all of these become resistance based what? Identities, which the groups have picked upon themselves. All right. Now, the third issue is project-based identity. Now, what is project-based identity? This is based on what? Self-identification. Although drawing upon what? Cultural, historical, and geographical components for the purpose. Such a project might be of national or what? Generic nature. So, how do you identify yourself? Okay. Now, project-based are identities that we pick up ourselves to undertake a certain project. Often, after the project, that identity comes to an end. Okay, so it is just for a period of time. Once we achieve what we want, then of course we bring that identity to an end. So today, you're a student, that's your identity. Tomorrow you're not a student because the project of being a student had what? Come to an end. All right. For example, increased female representation in parliament campaign. Now, a group of people were calling for what? An increase in female representation somewhere 2012 and 2016. And even the current 2020 upcoming elections, people are calling for what? Increase in female representation in parliament. Now, after that exercise of elections, then the identity of the group comes to an end, okay? Or if they achieve whatever percentage they're calling for, then that group does what? Come to an end, okay? So that is a project-based what? Identity. So they're identified with what? The project. Others include Brigmark Our Girls, the groups that were protesting and calling for the police to expedite its investigations with regards to the Takrady girls that were missing. Okay, so once the issues comes to an end, those groups or those identities no longer do what? Exist. There are several other protests by nukes, okay, especially in the 1969, 1968, and what have you. Okay, several protests which identified nukes as a political group or a group of elite students who fought and who were active so far as the politics of the country was concerned. Okay, all right. So you'll see that during the short life of the PP government, the nukes had confrontations with what? Government, okay, on a number of issues. To start with, they called on the government to grant amnesty to ex-president Nkrumah and all those who had gone into exile. Okay, now this call infuriated the government, and students' demand was described as what? Treasonable. So this is what happens, okay, or this is what happened, but it tells you that these are all what? Project-based identities. And once the projects have been achieved, those identities no longer exist. So what are identity groups? Okay, so we looked at an identity. Now, what are identity groups? As long as individuals are free to associate, identity groups of many kinds will exist. Now, we are at liberty to join groups. Freedom of association. So for us, this freedom of association exists. What it means is that identity groups will be formed every now and then. Okay, this is because free people do what? Mutually identify in many politically what? Relevant ways. Identity groups may be organized or unorganized, and may be inside or outside the official what? Organs of government. So an identity group can be formal, at the same time it can be informal. They could have a name, at times they don't have names. They can be in power, or they can be part of government, or they can be what? Outside of what? Government. Identity groups are organizations that people belong to due to their what? Typical characteristics. Now, if I have a certain characteristics, I can decide to join a group which also identifies with my characteristics. Okay, for example, LGBT. If I have the tendency of, being a gay or transgender or something, then it becomes easier for me to also identify with groups that are already into that. Okay, so due to my personal characteristics or typical characteristics, it is easier for me to join those groups because I think I identify with them. Now, we join identity groups based on what? Gender. Now, these are the typical characteristics. Gender, maybe I'm a male and there's a group of males, so I may decide to join, okay, because I'm a male. You may also decide to join because you are a female, so far as female groups are concerned. Race, a lot of racial groups, okay, have been formed. Okay, so which race do you identify with? Nationality, okay, class, sexual orientation, age, physical ability or disability, and then what? Ideology. Now, what is the difference between identity groups and interest groups? Now, identity groups are different from interest groups in the following ways. One, identity group politics is bound up with a sense of who people are. Okay, so identity deals more with who I am, what my characteristics are, what I believe in. Okay, but interest groups are bound up by what? A sense of what people want. So interest groups are interested in something, okay, like let's say a change in policy, okay, or a school to be built, or an environmental practice, okay, to be changed or adhered to. So when you look at what is at stake, when you look at what is at stake, then you know the difference between what? An interest group and then what? An identity what? Group. Interest groups are there for what they want. Okay. But identity groups are there for who the people want are. Identity groups work for the benefits of the group. Okay, so we are, that is us. So we are all working for the benefits of the group. While interest groups work for the benefits of what? Individual people. So they are individual benefits, because if I join an interest group, what it means is that I have something that I'm going to benefit from. Okay, there's something at stake that I am going to benefit from as an individual. Okay, then if I'm part of an identity group, then what it means is I'm working for the interests of what? The group as a whole, and not my personal what? Gains. Again, identity groups see their survival attached to the group. So I am who I am because of who you are. Okay, kind of Uhuru principle. Okay, I am because you are. So our survival, our existence is attached to what? Each other. But interest groups see their survival attached to what is what? At stake. Example, natural resources. So their survival depends on what is at stake. Depends on whether it is the gold, depends on whether it is the oil, depends on whether it is the environment. So there's always what? This personal interest. And that interest is attached to what is at stake. Meanwhile, the interest of what? Identity groups is a survival, okay, of the group as a whole. Now let's look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of identity groups. Identity groups have their positive and negative parts. Okay, now they are not all that good, at the same time they are not all that bad. So there are positives and there are negative sides. To identity groups. Okay, identity groups occupy an uneasy place in democracy. Why? Because democracy allows for people to be identified. Okay, now once you are part of an identity group, it means you are exercising your freedom of what? Association. At the same time, that freedom of association creates problems, because you are always protesting, you are always calling on government to do A, B, or C. So it makes it what? Uneasy for democracy to actually work. Okay, so that's one of the pressures that identity groups could actually cause to democracy. Now, critics emphasize how much group identities constrain rather than liberate individuals. So this is a negative. Okay, the critics are saying that identity groups rather constrain than liberate. Okay, for instance, if I am having an identity by virtue of what? Birth. Let's say I was born into the Catholic Church. Okay, and that identity as a Catholic, it's rather do what constrains me to look at other options than liberates me. So, oh, we are Catholics. You don't have to join. You don't have to join this group. You don't have to marry from that group and all of that. So that's the identity, but it's kind of what? Restricting you. Okay, constraining you. Oh, I'm a Muslim and I want to marry a Christian. No, we Muslims, this is us. We don't do this. We don't do that. So that's the argument that identity groups end up what? Constraining rather than what? Liberating individuals. When people are identified as black or white, male or female, Irish or Arabic, Jew, therefore means they are what? Stereotyped. Okay, so identities create what? Stereotypes. And these stereotypes may be in terms of race, okay, in the case of black and white. Female, male is gender stereotypes. Irish, Arabic is ethnicity stereotype. Catholic and Jew is what? Religion stereotype. Deaf or mute is what? Disability what? Stereotype. So if you identify, it creates what? Stereotypes. Okay, and once that happens, it means that you are denied a certain what? Individuality. For instance, I am, let's say, deaf, okay, but I can do certain things. But because of the stereotype around deaf people in general, people wouldn't see me as an individual who is deaf but have other capabilities, but may subsume me or may add me up to the lot of what? Deaf, and then give me what? Certain descriptions which are what? Stereotypical. Okay. If you are disabled in one way, you are able in another way. But all the time, once you are identified as a disabled person, the way people treat you is different, even when you have the capabilities of doing certain things what? Yourself. So we are denied a certain what? Individuality that comes with our own distinctive character. I get it, and freedom to affiliate as they see fit. Okay, so an example, let's use the gender example. You are a woman. Now you are restricted. Okay, if you are born in this part of the world, especially to uneducated parents, okay, once you are a female, that alone puts you within what? A certain stereotypical image. You can't do certain things. You can't take certain decisions. You can't participate in, serious family businesses or gatherings or meetings. Are you getting it? In as much as you may have the potential, they still push you toward the back. Okay, that's stereotypical. I remember my study, I conducted a study on the Rastafarians, okay, and what came up is that a woman cannot lead Nyabingi, which is more like the spiritual aspects or prayer of what the Rastafarians. Okay, and even if a woman has all the expertise and the knowledge about it, she needs to transfer that to a male so that the male will lead. Now, this constrains women. Okay, this puts them in a certain place which disallows them to express themselves. So identities can at times constrain instead of what? Liberate people. The analysis that follows suggests that organizing politically on the basis of group identity is not good or bad thing in itself. Okay, so political, now we're looking at identity so far as politics is concerned. It's not in itself a bad thing. Identifying with a certain political party or political organization or group doesn't make you what? Bad or good in itself. Now you also need to understand that when we talk about politics, they were not only looking at issues of NDC and PP, we are looking at issues of power. Okay, and in every institution, in every place, there are issues of power. Okay, so power is what we speak about when we look at what? Identity or politics. So we're looking at how identities make themselves relevant or have a share of the existing power in either the institutions that they belong to, the environment or society that they belong to, or the nation that's what we belong to. When individuals themselves identify racially, religiously, as a consequence of being identified with groups, they often develop what? Hostilities. Okay, towards other groups. Now, another disadvantage of this identities, hostilities. They are hostile. You see, people are very aggressive, okay, towards other identities, okay, which makes identity politics a very dangerous thing at times because once you form certain identities or you belong to a certain group, you see all other groups as outside of your group and resisting, and at most times you become hostile to those groups. Okay, and a sense of what superiority. At times you feel by your identity you are superior than others. I belong to this group, so all other groups are what inferior. So not just about hostilities against those other groups, but you also have a sense of what superiority, and that is a negative thing so far as identity what politics is concerned. Example, when you say, when you're identified with, when you kill 1,000, 1,000 will come. Okay, this makes you feel, superior, because hey, we are strong. Even if 1,000 should go down, 1,000 will also do come. Okay, so we are not a people you can joke with. That's what an identity. Then this too, until the bones are what rotten by Accra House of Folk. The first one was for Asante Kotoko. Now this is Accra House of Folk. Like we never die. Are you getting it? Until our bones are rotten, and of course, it means a lot. It means a sense of power. It means they are good, and you can't destroy them because if they don't die until their bones are rotten, how does that happen? I get, and how do you get your bones rotten before you die? Meaning invincible people. So these things are a sense of what? Superiority. Okay, it shows a sense of superiority so far as identity or politics is concerned. Again, groups frequently vie against one another in uncompromising ways. That's an negative of what? Identity politics, okay? So very uncompromising ways, and they most often sacrifice justice. Are you getting it? Now, when this coronavirus thing came in and up till this stage, we know that Ghanaians are also affected, okay? But the foreigners who are affected, we have changed our attitude towards them altogether. So even if a foreigner doesn't have, the way we treat them has drastically changed. Are you getting it? So we've sacrificed what? Justice. We're not treating them in a justifiable manner, okay? You remember the bus station, is it at Takrady, where two Chinese boarded the bus and everybody had to get down, that is not justifiable because you don't know who is a carrier of the coronavirus, okay? And even peace, okay? So we sacrifice justice, we also sacrifice what? Peace for what? Vindicating our superiority as a group. So this is a typical issue of Hutus and Tutsis, okay? Where the Hutus attacked the Tutsis and thought that they are vindicated by what? The power that they yield. When identity groups put the group above opposition or to injustice, they are morally what? Suspect. So it is important that identity groups, okay, place themselves in a way that justice is above them, so that they respect justice, they treat other people what? Equally. Okay, so identity groups do better when they offer what? Mutual support and help combat injustice for disadvantaged people. So you see, these are the things that the identity groups should rather do, to fight for the marginalized or the advantaged what? People. But oftentimes you also see that identity groups create more mayhem, they create more danger, they create more injustices to other minor groups than ever due to themselves. Even when combating injustice, okay, this another thing about identity groups and the kind of methods that they apply. That even when they are fighting injustice, okay, or they are demonstrating or doing all sorts of things for them to be heard, okay, that injustice is what? Justified. or even if that injustice is justified, the end result is what? Often what? Bad. It is often ugly. Okay. A completely justifiable struggle against the right violations of an identity group, such as apartheid, SA, and Shell Egoni, is often what? Ugly. So the case of Shell and Egoni people, now these people were demonstrating, they were resisting, they were fighting for themselves. But at the end of the day, they were casualties. In apartheid Africa too, same, they were casualties. So identity groups, even when they are fighting for against injustice, even when they are fighting for marginalized and disadvantaged people, one thing that you see is that at the end of the day, they are casualties. Okay, so even fighting for justice or against injustice at times becomes what? A big problem. This is because there are various identities in any given environment. So any resistance is also opposed with what? Resistance. So every resistance encounters what? A resistance. And we know, we look there at the Ghana School of the Law, they resist certain things, but they face resistance from what? The police. Are you getting it? So it's just like demonstrators and all of that. Anytime you are resisting something, the opposite also does what? Resist you. So that's how come the consequences are often ugly when we look at what? Identity politics. Now, other significances of identity politics include identity groups can significantly influence individual identities, okay, consistent with what? Individual freedom. So, if we identify with a certain group, it can influence me, okay? It can make me, it can empower me because I know I belong to this group of people, okay? I identify with this group of people and they have a wider, or broader advantage to undertake certain projects or to do certain things, okay? So freedom of association is a basic individual freedom. Individual identity political groups do not comprehensively define the identity of individuals, but they nonetheless influence their identities in modern ways. Now, the second is that numbers count. Now, if you want to be heard, you need to belong to what? Numbers. Okay, numbers are important. So, identity groups give you what? Those numbers. Okay, they exert numbers exert political influence. Democracy is about what? Numbers. So if you belong to a group that has the numbers, what it means is that it makes it easier for your concerns to be addressed. It makes it easier for you to feel what? Belonged. Identity groups have the ability to play what? Critical role in combating civic inequalities. So that's another positive thing about identity groups. Okay, they fight inequalities and in unequal freedoms and opportunities of individuals, okay, who identify with the group. So if you belong to the group and there's something going on against you, something against your rights, okay, the group comes in to fight for you and to give you what you lack. Even when identity groups do not combat injustice, as long as they do not inflict it, they can be valued. So as long as these groups do not cause any challenge or any trouble, okay, their existence is what? Valued, because it's more like a signpost to the powers that be that if things are not going well or right, then these groups will have the right to speak, okay, so they are even valued. Okay, now let's look at identity politics and resistance movements in the global stage. Now, nationality itself is a group identity, right? Ghanaian, so what makes me a Ghanaian is as a result of what? My nationality. okay, in the name of which injustice have been both inflicted and resisted. So even if you're saying that, now if you look at nations, nations even cause troubles. Mm. Nations resist, nations are identities, okay, and they can both, inflict or resist what? Injustices. For example, slavery in the United States was both what? Institutionalized and then opposed in what? Nationalism's name. So it took the nation or the state in the US to establish or institutionalize what? Slavery. It took the same state to say no, enough of what? Slavery. Okay. Democracies have fought both aggressive and defensive wars by encouraging nationalist impulses among their citizens. So you've seen countries trying to maintain their identity, or as a result of identity politics, countries involving themselves in wars. Okay, for example, the Bush-Iraqi war. Are you getting it? So they are aggressive. They engage in defensive wars by encouraging what? Nationalist impulses. Oh, you killed a member. We're also coming to kill you. So that sense of, oh, I'm a Ghanaian. Anything that happens to a Ghanaian elsewhere, I have to resist. I have to fight. That impulse, okay, makes nations to even go to war against other nations. Okay, all in the name of what? Identity politics. People have rallied around a wide variety of what? Nationalist identities, even in support of what? Tyrannical regimes. In the case of the PNDC, you see that people or nationals actually said, oh, the PNDC did well. I mean, PNDC 1 did well by cleaning the system. Okay. Now, when you look at other places, you see that tyrannies, okay, also have been resisted by what? Many nationalist movements. So in one case, like the case of Ghana in PNDC 1, people actually praised or acknowledged the importance of that organization. But when you look at other places, a similar organization headed by Gaddafi wasn't good, bad. Okay, so in one way, the nation can be tyrannical, the nation can be democratic, they can support any group that they want to. Okay, all right. So what are some of the resistance movements, okay, or groups within the global stage? Let's look at some of the examples, okay. In 1990, Israel, a group of conservative and Orthodox Jewish women petitioned the High Court of Justice to be given the same rights as well Jewish men to pray in public. A year earlier, these women had peacefully marched to the Western Wall in Jerusalem, holding a Torah determined to pray there without male approval. And they were attacked by a group of mainstream Orthodox Jews who were defending their religious prohibition of women from praying as Orthodox men do in public. 10 years later, in 2000, the court recognized the women's right to pray at the wall without abuse by what? Other worshippers. So this is a typical example of what? Identity politics. Based on what? Gender. Okay, gender and religion. Oh, as a female, you can't pray here. You can't do this. You can't do that. Okay, so there are a lot of demonstrations. All right. Another issue is revolves around James Dale, okay, who was part of the Boy Scouts, okay, of America, okay, and he was a gay, and when the group realized that, they kicked him from the group, and he took the issue to court. He won, but later on, the Boy Scouts also appealed and said they are what? A group, okay? They are a group based on their expressive freedom, okay, to oppose homosexuality. So he lost and had to leave the group. So you see that groups have identities, individuals also have what? Identities. And if you want to belong to the group, you need to do certain things that the group what believes in. So at times, your individual rights do not supersede the what group rights, okay, of the organizations you belong to. Now, we've had a lot of resistance, movements prior to the media, okay, especially from 1800 down to now. A lot of resistance movements have taken place. But what is the role of the media now in these things? Let's look at this. Arab revolutions, Occupy movement had proven resistance are indicative of specific phases of what? Resistance. Okay. All right. Now, social media is seen as a new ground for what? Political and social activism. Though such groups do not have much impact and do not last long like traditional protests. So we are saying that media has provided a platform for protests and activism to take place, okay? But what happens in the media does not last, or the impact is not as great as the physical protests that take place, okay, on our streets. The media have changed. However, what the media has done is that it has changed the speed at which the resistance movement formed. So the media helps the movements to be formed, okay, to gather, to coordinate, to share information, okay. That is what the media does. Some time ago, it takes months for a movement to be formed. But now, as a result of the media, it is easier for groups to be formed. In 2014, the hashtag Bring Back Our Girls social media campaign transferred people around the world concerning the plight of 276 schoolgirls who were kidnapped by Boko Haram. Now, this campaign took place on social media, with a lot of countries supporting the campaign, okay, and calling for Boko Haram to release the 276 Chibok girls, okay. Now, Black Lives Matter. Now, Black Lives Matter is a movement that emerged intending to eliminate systematic injustices and racial inequalities that prevails against the Black community, okay. Now, the BLM, or the Black Lives Matter, use a lot of media activities, okay. They use the media to coordinate, they use the media to do a lot of things. So Mount argues that social media provided the BLM, okay, the opportunity to resource, mobilize, to frame their messages, and then to build coalition. Another group which effectively uses the new media is SAS Lebanon. Now, SAS Lebanon is a Facebook movement which deals with issues of relating to housemates or house helps in Lebanon. It is a Canadian-based organization which allows for people in Lebanon who work in houses of the rich to voice out and to speak up, okay. Now, the page demonstrates abuse of domestic workers in Lebanon and encourages maids to speak up and report cases of discrimination, abuse, and racial injustice within the kafala system, okay. As of yesterday, the group had 57,502 followers, okay, and the group always faced resistance from the Lebanese government. And what it means is that house helps don't have much or they don't have a voice so far as Lebanon is concerned. So they are using social media to actually make their voices heard, okay. This same kafala system came up during the Silicon Valley apps that were used to do a trade, okay, or to engage in modern slave trade. So on the slide, you've seen that there is a link. Now, this link will take you to a Ghanaian who committed suicide as a result of this kafala system in Lebanon. She was working in the house of her master and mistress, and she complained of abuses. But because in Lebanon you can't even go out until you have the permission of your manager or mistress, she had to endure. But at the end of the day, shared content or information with SAS Lebanon group before committing suicide. All right, so this is where we'll end today. Let your comments and your questions come, and I'll get them answered for you. All right, thank you, and have a good time.